Hello everyone, this is Saurabh Sharma. Let's start with the current affairs session of January 10th, 2022. In this video, the first topic we will be taking it is MCC, Model Code of Conduct. This issue is actually finding a mention in the current affairs because Prime Minister Narendra Modi's name and photo will be removed from the COVID-19 vaccination certificates issued in the 5 poll bound states since the Model Code of Conduct has come into force there. So what is Model Code of Conduct? What is it? Its evolution. What are the binding aspects of this conduct? Is it legally enforceable? And what are the obligations for political parties, opposition, executives, or etc. In this sense, this MCC will be covered today in this video. So let's just take a look that what is Model Code of Conduct. The Model Code of Conduct is basically a morality based conduct which is enforced by Election Commission of India, but it has no legal foundations or no legal underlying principles. It is just to maintain a free, fair and rational election atmosphere in the country, that those who are using the state resources or are in possession of state resources or are controlling the state resources by being in the government part are not taking the advantage from those who are not holding those resources. So it is basically creating a balance between the rival political parties so that the free and fair elections can be conducted in the country, right? So what is it? It is a set of guidelines issued by Election Commission of India to regulate political parties, candidates, their behaviors, their actions, their speeches, their conduct, their overall devotions towards the procedures involved in the campaigning period before the election date, because on that date there is no prasar, no speeches, no political rallies and etc. It is all banned because 48 hours before the election date or election timing or the casting of vote timing, it is all stopped. So this is basically to regulate political parties and their candidates' general behavior so that a healthy election atmosphere, election related or election conducting atmosphere is created in the country or in the poll bound region, states or districts, or in the areas where or in the constituencies whereby elections are declared. The rules range from issued related to speeches, polling day, polling booths, portfolios, content of election manifestos, processions and general conduct, so that free and fair elections are conducted in the country. So now, when does it come into effect? According to PIB, a version of the MCC was first introduced in the state assembly elections of Kerala in 1960, and it was a successful model that it was largely followed by all political parties in the 1962 elections and continued to be followed in subsequent general elections, state elections, by-elections. In October 1979, the Election Commission added a section to regulate the party in power and prevent it from gaining an unfair advantage at the time of elections, because largely all the state related resources, be it media, be it money, be it a transport system, logistical system or whatsoever, is in their control. If it is not implemented or not conducted in that manner, the advantage will be the disadvantages for those who are not in power. The MCC comes into force from the date of election schedule is announced by election commissioners until the date the results are out. So it means, for example, let's say in any state of the country, 1st April will be the voting day, first voting day, and election commission through the press conferences or whatever gazette, they have issued a notification that, for example, in the state of XYZ name, on 1st January we are announcing that the election will be taking place on 1st of April. So by 29th or 30th of March, all the political parties, rallies, speeches, everything will be stopped and barred, and they are started from the day or just before the day it is announced. But MCC is introduced right at the time of announcement of elections, be it 1st January for the elections to be held on 1st of April, and let's say the results is coming out on 5th of April. So that means from 1st January to 5th of April, the entire period will be under MCC implementation. So this is the general criteria of this MCC. Now just take a look at the constitutional provision. What is it saying? Article 324 of the Constitution mandates the Election Commission to hold free and fair elections to the Parliament and the state legislatures. The MCC is a set of guidelines issued by the Election Commission to regulate political parties and candidates prior to elections to ensure free and fair elections, and so that a healthy election atmosphere in the country can be created. This is the general criteria. Now, the MCC is operational from the date that the election schedule is announced till the date the results are out. So this is what we have just talked about, that from 1st January, let's say it is announced and the results are coming on 5th of April. So within this period, the MCC will be implemented, and between these dates, whatever the foundations and regulations are generally implemented over the political parties, over the candidates, over any kind of conduct or behavior that will be seen here. Now, however, the commission can't make its announcement more than 3 weeks ahead of issuing the formal notifications of elections. That means commission can't make its announcement more than 3 weeks ahead of issuing the formal notifications of elections. It is also agreed that the inauguration of any completed or new project would be done by civil servants, so that the MCC did not hurt the public interest. Inauguration of any completed or new project would be done by civil servants, because civil servants generally ensures the continuity of the government, and they don't work for political parties, they work for the government. But government, if it is undergoing elections, that means that they are forming the part of the election system, and the government itself becoming candidate for the election. So that means the MCC will be implemented on the government because election is announced. But civil servants, since it is a permanent position as per the constitutional guidelines, and they can actually take care of all the projects and every single thing without involving the government directly or indirectly. Now, as we said, Kerala was the first state to adopt a code of conduct for elections, and the election commission decided to emulate Kerala's examples by 1974-79, just before the midterm general elections, that the election commission released a formal mode of conduct. Now, it contains 8 provisions. 8 provisions regarding general conduct, meetings, processions, polling day, polling booths, observers, party in power, and election manifestos. These are general things. You just have a brief idea about what the MCC is enshrined or made. The MCC is not enforceable by law. Certain provisions of MCC may be enforced through invoking corresponding provisions in other statutes, such as the Indian Penal Code 1860, Code of Criminal Procedure 1973, and Representation of the Peoples Act 1951, because the guidelines are given here that what comes under the specific mandate it is talking about. In this manner, if during the period of elections any of such provisions is violated, then it is being clubbed with the Indian Penal Code, Criminal Procedure Code, and the Representation of People Act, and from there it is derived and defined that whether it has hurt any kind of such thing which is making a general environment under MCC, and specific what specifics are hurt, so thereby it is dealt with the specific laws. Now, the MCC is not a part of the Representations of People Act, and the commission usually uses moral sanctions to get political parties and candidates to fall in line. So it is basically a morality based sanction or conduct guidelines. At the time of Lok Sabha elections, both the union and state governments are covered under the MCC, because Lok Sabha is bringing the representation from all the nooks and corners of the country. Nooks and corner of the country. Now, when and where is the MCC applicable? In case assembly elections, that means state it is talking about, the MCC is valid throughout the poll bound state. Throughout. In case the parliamentary or general elections of Lok Sabha, the MCC is valid throughout the country. Throughout the country. In case of by-elections to districts, the MCC is valid through the district where the election is to take place. Now, what about Rajya Sabha elections? No MCC is enforced because it is an indirect elections. And no people's involvement is there, direct. It is generally elected or referred by the already elected candidates in the assemblies or whatsoever. Now, restrictions imposed under MCC. What are the restrictions that are imposed under MCC? For governments, if we talk about, try to listen to it carefully. As soon as the code kicks in, the party in power, whether the center or in the state, should ensure that it does not use its official position for campaigning, because if its official position is being used or utilized in direct or indirect manner, that means some sort of influence can be created by the executives in the form of civil servants or other government officials, and thereby it will be creating an already biased environment or atmosphere towards the ruling party. In this manner, in the name of spending fundings or bringing in new projects or whatsoever, that will be basically to lure the voters towards their side. And here it is not giving the free and fair elections environment to the voters so that they can actually make the rational choices while casting their votes. Now, hence no policy, project or scheme can be announced that can influence the voting behavior. This is just we have said. And the code also states that the ministers must not combine official visits with election work or use official machinery for the same. But it is not at all easy task to differentiate between that what is the official work, what is the election related work, and it is generally the moral obligations of the aspirants that they do not infringe with it. The ruling government cannot make any ad hoc appointments in government, public undertakings, etc., which may influence the voters. So no ad hoc appointments in government public undertakings, because that will again work as the influencing part. Why public undertakings? Because the labor unions, the lobbies, the pressure groups, the interest groups generally working for the government or against the government, they might change the equation of election during that time. Political parties or candidates can be criticized based only on their work record, and no caste and communal sentiments can be used to lure voters. However, this is remaining the biggest and largest problem in the country when it comes to election, that hate speeches, communal speeches, and speeches based on caste lines and the data specific to the caste, and trying to reducing the strength of voters and mapping them into the social criterias based on caste, class, color, language, and whatsoever political, religious sentiments. It is actually there that general good is not being considered. Rather, a section is being targeted because that can only bring the voters in, the political parties in. Here, the major drawback in India's constitutional system, or let's say Representation of People's Act, is that India uses the first past the post system. Here, no matters what is the majority, even if one person has casted the vote and none other than that one has casted the vote, to whom that one vote is casted, that will be declared as winner, irrespective of the strength, irrespective of the population, irrespective of the likings of the people, doesn't matter. Here, first past the post system wins. So therefore, the luring, if one section is being lured or targeted, and it is targeted so well that if it turns out to vote 100% and the other sections are generally stopped from casting their vote through the muscle power, through any other power, money power, or whatsoever, the elections are decided. So this is a drawback in the election system. Now, for political parties, what are the obligations? The party must avoid advertising at the cost of the public exchequer, or using official mass media for publicity on achievements to improve chances of victory in the elections, because via the election commission, a limited time or a specified time is granted for all the political parties on air or on media and other social platform or media related platforms. The ruling party cannot use government transport or machinery for campaigning. Also, ensure that public places such as Maidan, etc., for holding election meetings, and facilities like the use of helipads are provided to the opposition parties on the same terms and conditions on which they are used by the party in power. That means all the resources not belonging to exchequer directly should be utilized in a fair and transparent manner. Holding public meetings during the 48-hour period before the hour fixed for the closing of the poll is also prohibited. That means the moment casting of first vote is decided, before 48 hours to that hour will be that all the public meetings, speeches, gatherings, and everything will be prohibited. The 48-hour period is known as election silence. So there, all the political parties must observe the silence of not making any noises or any voice. Now, the idea is to allow a voter a campaign-free environment to reflect on events before casting her vote, so that they can actually make a rational choice. The issue of advertisement at the cost of public exchequer in the newspapers and other media is also considered as an offense, because it is not a fair practice. Mosques, churches, temples, or other religious worship places should not be used for election propaganda. Bribing, intimidating, or impersonation of voters is also barred, because it is not letting us create a healthy environment. Is it legally binding? Is it legally binding? The fact is, the MCC is evolved as a part of the Election Commission of India's drive to ensure free and fair elections, and was the result of a consensus among major political parties, because the one who is in opposition is wanting to go into power, and the one who is in power today might feel that their position can also be changed, and tomorrow they will have to take these seats of opposition, so that will become a disadvantage for them if they are not going to give them that transparent or free choice and scope to the party in the opposition. So this is the general consensus of major political parties, that the MCC will be deployed in such manner. It has no statutory backing. Simply put, this means anybody breaching the MCC cannot be proceeded against under any clause of the code. The Election Commission uses moral sanctions or censure for its enforcement. That, let's say, any political leader is asked to show up in the charges framed against that person under MCC. So there, if the justification provided by them, it satisfies the morality and the principle of legal and fair treatment, a fair and transparent treatment set by the Election Commission of India, then it is fine, but if it is not satisfying the reason of their speeches and their gestures and their actions during the MCC is implemented, then the censures of 2 days ban, 3 days ban, 7 days political ban, or like a ban on conducting any gatherings, speeches, or media processions, etc., will be imposed. Now, what is generally if the code is violated? Simply, the Election Commission of India can issue a notice to a politician or a party for alleged breach of MCC, and on the basis of a complaint by another party or individual, whereas the concrete proof and rational facts must be provided to prove that the MCC has been violated, because the period provided by the Election Commission of India for their gatherings and processions and public meetings is very limited and also important. So therefore, the Election Commission of India is very carefully proceeding towards the complaints they have received. Once a notice is issued, the person or party must reply in writing, either accepting fault and tendering an unconditional apology or rebutting the allegations. In the latter case, if the person or party is found guilty, subsequently he or she can attract a written censure from the ECI, something that may seem a mere slap on the wrist. However, in extreme cases like a candidate using money, liquor to influence votes, or trying to divide voters in the name of religion, caste, and target voters, Election Commission of India can also order registration of a criminal case under IPC or Income Tax Act against the people. As we have seen that Criminal Code of Criminal Procedures and Indian Penal Code and RP Act 1951, all these activities can be booked under these charges. In case of a hate speech, a complaint can be filed under the IPC or CRPC. There are laws against the misuse of religious places for seeking votes, etc. We have covered this entire thing thoroughly in the hate speech video of 1st January. Now, let's say we have discussed that there is no statutory backing to this thing. If the statutory backing is given to MCC, what will happen? Both the Election Commission of India and several independent experts believe that giving statutory backing to the MCC would only make the job of the commission more difficult, because commission is working independently, and if the backing is there, then it will delay the process of Election Commission of India, because the parties will go and they will be hurriedly going to the High Courts and Supreme Court to ban the process to procedure, and India spends crores of rupees, thousands of crores of rupees in conducting one general election. So it is very important that it should be carefully considered and discussed, and all the pros and cons must be analyzed and can be discussed thoroughly, that whether the statutory backing is needed to MCC or not. This is because every alleged offense will then have to go to an appropriate court, this as I said, and right up to the Supreme Court, then further delays the process. Given the flaws of our legal system, election petitions filed decades ago are still pending before many high courts. So is it solving the problem? No, it is not solving the problem. Rather, it will actually exponentially damage or give more damages to the system or to the procedure. It is anybody's guess what the situation might lead to, because there is no certain framework, because every mind has different creativity and innovative thinking, and in what sense they are actually breaking the MCC or violating the MCC, and the person who is complaining against them, under what sense has he thought that it should be considered as a violation of MCC, because MCC is generally used as a tool for the political parties and candidates to cut down the opportunities available with all the candidates and political parties to gain the extra advantage, extra reach to the voters, and giving or sending the messages with more clarity, so that the chances of their win are increases. This is basically the general issue. Now, one point, is social media covered under MCC? The Election Commission has taken the view that the MCC will also apply to content posted by political parties and candidates on the internet, including on social media sites, for example Twitter, for example Facebook, for example Koo app, etc. Because sometimes actions have many modes, and therefore this is considered as violation if it is not fitting the morality declared under or is considered under MCC. In 2013, the commission laid down guidelines to regulate the use of social media by parties and candidates. Candidates, just actually these dates are generally working as benchmarks, watershed for anything, for any behavior. So you should have just a general idea and keep in mind, and also bring that in habit to quote these dates while writing answer of such nature. Candidates have to provide their email address, details of accounts on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, etc., and add the expenditure on advertisements posted on social media to their overall expenditure for the elections, because social media also incurs expenditure which is actually limited under MCC or set by the ECI, and going beyond the allowed expenditure level, that will also attract the violations of MCC. Now, so how it can enforce the MCC without statutory backing? This is we have seen here, as I have already explained to you. Now, section 126 and 26A of the Representations of the People Act. Section 126 of the Representation of the People's Act, that is RPA, prohibits displaying any election matter by means inter alia of television or similar apparatus during the period of 48 hours before the hour fixed of the conclusion of poll in a constituency. Section 126 of RPA Act. Election matter has been defined as any matter intended or calculated to influence or affect the result of an election by involving the voters. This shall, among other things, include display of any opinion poll and standard debates, visuals and sound bites, because opinions can actually manipulate things, manipulate the orientations of the voters. How? For example, majority of the people in the opinion polls is said to have voted in favor of candidate A. Then the person who has voted in favor of candidate B, because he has a limited reach and he can only discuss about like who has voted for whom in a limited reach only. In that sense, the person or who is actually willing to vote for whom, in that sense, the person might think that since majority of the people, according to the debates and opinion polls going on TV, media, news channels, is going towards A, and if he's voting towards B, then his vote will lose its exercising opportunity, and like it will not going to give any major difference, and he will be ultimately voting to the person who is not coming into the power. So therefore he will change his orientation and he will also vote towards the category, towards the political party or candidate who is being shown in the TV, in the opinion polls and standard debates. So this is actually excuse me, regulated wisely, and it is controlled wisely, because it is important and it can actually interfere with the rational thought process of candidates while casting his votes. Now, section 126A of the RPA Act prohibits conduct of exit poll and dissemination of its results during the hour fixed for commencement of poll and half an hour after the time fixed for close of poll in all the states and union territories. That means, let's say after polls are over, so after the lagging of half an hour, the exit polls process can be started, but before just that it is not at all possible, because it can ignite the issues of any kind of illegal activities in the country or in the areas. You might have seen in the Bollywood movies of 90s and 2000s that booth capturing was the major issue, and when this VVPAT system or electronic voting machine system has been introduced in the country, the booth capturing activities have been controlled in so many ways, because the the VVPAT machines or the voting machines can be, if the machine is being tampered with, the machine will lose all its data. This is how it is programmed. But let me just tell you one example here, that in Germany, what happens is that Germany has not allowed the use of any electronic voting machines or VVPAT for that matters, because they say that election procedure is a kind of activity in the country that decides the government. And if we are saying that government will be decided by the or chosen by the people or the population, then it is our foremost duty that election process must be made so easy that the layman or the most layman in the country can understand the process. And electronic aspects can also be tempered with, because ultimately it is working on a software clubbed with the hardware, and if the person is not understanding the mechanism this hardware and software combination is working, then the ultimate availability of opportunity upon which the voter is going to decide his voting orientation, that will be tempered with, that will be affected. Therefore, the ultimate objective of getting the elections done in a free, fair and transparent manner in a good and positive political atmosphere in the country is generally lost. So Germany has stopped using any electronic voting machines, VVPATs, etc. But in India, it is not, because many a times or of late we have seen that the allegations of tampering with the voting machines is generally, we have read about, we have also seen. For example, in the previous elections of Lok Sabha, or in state elections, or in West Bengal elections, or in so many other places election, it is allegation, or it has been an allegation of the on the ruling government that whoever was voting to whom, the votes were going towards a specific political party. We are not saying that how far those allegations were true or correct, because that could be baseless, that could just be an allegation. But here the question arises that is this a perspective, or is this a scope of debate, and is this an opportunity where literally corrupt minds can take the benefits? So we should have such a thing, we should have such a system in place where voters are ultimately sure and they are relaxed in mind that whomsoever they are voting to, the vote is going to that person or political party only, without any scope of infringement through any electronic means, modes or system that he or she as a voter does not understand. So understanding of the procedure, then only the rational choices as a voter can only be made. If it is not being made, then I'm sorry, my dear friends, election system yet needs to be reformed. And India is such a big country with voluminous people who are coming under the voting brackets age, and majority of the people, they do not understand the rationale behind the voting system. And for them to make it the most easiest thing, like having water from a glass, that should be the duty and moral responsibility, and also the parliamentary responsibility to the government of India, that they bring such a law where all the people are covered into it. Those who are educated, those who are not educated, those who understand the system, those who do not understand the system, then only the real democracy will work at or will be there at work, at grass level, at whatsoever level you say. So this is about the MCC. And one more point I would like to add, that linking the election card with the Aadhaar is also not solving the positivity, or not going to bring the positive changes in the election system procedure in the country, because Aadhaar is just the identification proof. It is not a residential proof of the country, and it is not giving you the right to citizenship in the country. Whereas Election Commission of India is basically who is issuing the election cards are your residential proof and your citizen proof of the country. So these two things cannot be clubbed with. Second thing, Election Commission body is the constitutional body, and Aadhaar is just a department or a body who is just utilizing the data collection system, processing it and issuing the cards, and making two bodies, one is constitutional, one is non-constitutional, working together, it will not create a positive environment in the country. Because we have seen that many people have been issued with multiples and duplicacies of Aadhars. And here, many times we have seen that, for example, in Karnataka, for example, in many poll-bound states, we have seen that automatic deletion of the people from the identification database based on the Aadhar, and they were not even informed about that. And when the person is going to vote, and if he is being asked for the Aadhar card or Aadhar system, he finds that his election card is basically cancelled without any prior intimation, without making the process, without letting him know the reason of their cancellation. So it means that somewhere loops are existing, and who is taking the benefits of these loops, who is not taking the benefits of this loop, who is the responsible person for handling the data, and who is deciding that what sort of mismanagement about the data and tampering has happened. This is a complex system. So we have to verify it, we have to make it absolutely rational, we have to make it an ideal system. Then only we can think that what more efforts can be made to make our election procedure in the country more transparent and unchallenging. That it should work on Six Sigma rule, that the possibility of any mistake or any negativity in the process is minimized to hell. That the fair, transparent and unique rational system of voting, because this is the only power in the hands of local people who are educated, non-educated, or whatsoever social status, legal status, educated status, whatever they are holding in the country, they can cast their votes and they can decide who will going to rule them as government. So this is the only one opportunity, hence it should be the most fundamental, most concrete, most stable opportunity available in the hands of the people and citizenry. Then only an informed citizenry, including or inclusive citizenry in the decision making and choosing of government can be established. So this is an important topic for your exam point of views, because RPA 1951 or Representations of People's Act is specifically mentioned in the syllabus part of GS paper 2, that is making the part of your governance area for the syllabus. So this MCC is important and we can expect the questions from this. If not question, might be an essay, or if not essay, that might be asked in the interview room. So that's all about the MCC. Let's move towards the next topic in the series. Citizenship Amendment Act 2019. This is important because the Ministry of Home Affairs did not notify the Citizenship Amendment Act 2019 rules. The third extended deadline after the act was passed. January 9, 2022 was the last day of an extension it sought from the two parliamentary committees in the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha to frame the rules. Who? The MHA. Now, without rules, the act cannot be implemented. Because what is an act? It is basically a law which sets the rules, obligations and punishments under the act. Now, the Citizenship Amendment Act 2019 was passed by the Parliament in December 2019, and here you can recall that what a massive protest continued in Delhi at Shaheen Bagh, that people remained gathered and sitting at one place in the severe cold of Delhi from December to March. It was a time when the first Janata curfew was announced. The timeline is not important for us. The important is to understand the gist, that what was wrong in that people had to sit on such a long protest. So what is this act? This act amends the Citizenship Act 1955 and seeks to make foreign illegal immigrants of certain religious communities, Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist, Jain, Parsi or Christian coming from Afghanistan, Bangladesh and Pakistan eligible for Indian citizenship. Here, the religion Islam or Islamic religion people or Islamic following people are not mentioned, because the countries they are coming from generally are Islamic republics or Islamic states. Who entered India on or before December 31, 2014 and do not reside in the 6 scheduled areas or in the states regulated by the inner line permits. This is basically seeks to make foreign illegal migrants of certain religions. So make foreign illegal migrants, it is to identify them. Also, it is giving them an opportunity to come from their countries and to stay in India and settle down in India. Other than one religious community, all the religious community people who are generally facing challenges in their daily life or in their existence in those countries can also make visit and come to India. Now, how citizenship acquired in India? In India, citizenship is regulated by the Citizenship Act 1955, and as per Article 5 to 11, only Parliament can make laws in this context about citizenship. Parliament, not President, Parliament. The Citizenship Act 1955 specifies that citizenship may be acquired in India through 5 modes: by birth in India, by descent, through registration, by naturalization, extended residence in India, and by incorporation of territory into India. This is hardly we have seen, because India is never after annexation of any foreign territory that it did not belong to, and also in India, annexation is generally not in the practices of Indian constitution form of governance or in the mentality of any sort of government or political leader. The Citizenship Act 1955 allows a person to apply for citizenship by naturalization if the person meets certain qualification. One of the qualification is that the person must have resided in India or been in central government service for the last 12 months and at least 11 years of the preceding 14 years. So here the person can naturally become the citizen of the country if he has stayed for almost 11 years in the country in the last 14 years. For this specified class of illegal migrants, the number of years of residency has been relaxed from 11 years to 5 years under this Citizenship Act. What we have made in amendment in 2019. So the period is reduced from 11 to 5 years. Now, are the provisions of the Act applicable across the country? The Act clarifies that the proposed amendments on citizenship to the specified class of illegal migrants will not apply to certain areas. These areas are the sixth schedule areas, that is AMMT, or you can remember it as ATM, Assam, Meghalaya, Mizoram and Tripura, because these states or these areas are falling under 6th schedule because majority of population is tribal. These 6th scheduled tribal areas including Karbi Anglong in Assam, Garo Hills in Meghalaya, Chakma district in Mizoram and Tripura tribal area district in Tripura. The state regulated by the inner line permit under the Bengal Eastern Frontier Regulations 1873. Inner line permit, it is basically an area where you have to take permission from the government of India if you are citizen of the country, and also there are separate permits for the people of foreign origin who wants to visit these areas covered under inner line permit, because it is to keep the natural habitat, their culture and their demographic intact from the external pressure from actually becoming a reason of diminishing and minimizing them to the minority. This inner line permit system was introduced by Britishers because they wanted to ensure that no conflict with the tribal people is going to happen with them when their businesses were conducted the administration, the economic activities, or whatsoever. So it was actually keeping the tribals separate from them and their interests separated from the tribals through this inner line permit system, and it is also working now. The inner line permit regulates visits of all persons, including Indian citizens, to Arunachal Pradesh, Mizoram, and Nagaland. Manipur is asking for inner line permit, but it is still a pending demand. How does the Act change the regulations for overseas citizens of India? The Act amends the provisions on registration of overseas citizens of India. OCI card holders are foreigners who are persons of Indian origin. First, we have PIO's card, but we actually cancelled PIO's card. Now India has only one card, that is overseas citizens of India. And OCI enjoys benefits such as the right to travel to India without a visa or to work and study here. They can also make investments and buy property other than agricultural lands. At present, the government may cancel a person's OCI registration on various grounds specified in the Act. In case of a cancellation, an OCI residing in India may be required to leave the country with immediate effect. The Act adds another ground for cancelling OCI registration: violation of any law notified by the Government of India, and the Act does not provide any guidance on the nature of laws which the central government may notify. Here, one thing is to analyze why the protest is coming up. The Citizenship Amendment Act and the NRC, the way it was presented to the people, or it was discussed in the public domain or in the media fraternity, it actually gave an environment of suspicion and fear to the people belonging to respective religious communities that their citizenship is in danger. And government may come up with such discretionary laws that their citizenship will be in danger. Also, government is trying to polarize the society by calling all the people belonging to respective or different religions in the adjacent countries of, or in the neighboring countries of Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and inviting them to settle down in India. In this way, the Islamic republics will lose their intermixed culture and diversity, and in this way, the religious people will be segregated and polarized in such a manner that one religion will be in one country, and minus that religion, all the religious communities will be living in India. And it is not a rational action from the government. In this context, many times central government, prime minister, and many other ministers have come up and tried to convince people and also explain that this law was not about to impact their citizenship status in the country. Also, this act was not to deprive them of their rights. This act was basically, I'm talking about CAA plus NRC. This act was generally to find out the illegal people who are settled in country, those who are creating tussles and hurdles, those who are manipulating the election system, those who are actually taking the opportunities which are generally meant for the local people, and also the Indians as a whole. Also, they are actually living in India on someone else's identity or on fake identities, that is actually giving a resort to the big issue of Indian internal security. That was the reasons actually explained by the Government of India. Here, the moral responsibility of government and also the opposition is there, that they first meet and discuss the issue. Such issues must be discussed deliberately, thoroughly, vastly, from all the angles in the parliament. Because India is India's biggest achievement since many decades or many centuries have been the philosophy of living together at one place. That shows that India is a diverse country, and this diversity actually projects a great image of India to the world level. And people come to India to study its diversity and see and learn that how the people belonging to so many religious groups, communities, ethnicity, races, linguistic backgrounds, how they are living together. And within this context, how Indian democracy is so stable and mature that hardly we have seen any fall of government or any immature or premature dissolution of any government at central level or state government most of the times. In this manner, such natured bills must be thoroughly discussed in parliament, thoroughly must be brought to the notice of standing committees, must be questioned, answered, then again questioned. And people must be assured simultaneously by the time an act is not becoming a law or a bill is not becoming an act, people must be assured that nothing to panic about, nothing to worry about, because people are only there to rely on the words of the government. If the government is actually keeping a silence on it, then the media, who is not maturely working in the country, will definitely complex the situation, will change the equations of the situation in the country, and therefore a panic situation or a confusing situation will be there in the country. What will happen if the people coming from outside to settle down in India? What will happen? India is already a resource burdened country. Natural resource, you say. India is having just less than 2% of total land of the earth, yet controlling 17 to 18% population of the world. That means the per capita availability of land is so less in the country. The opportunities of work so less in the country. The jobs, inflation, unemployment, crime rate, women's security, educational aspects, health related infrastructure, other physical infrastructure, and so many things are also compromised for the people who are staying in the country. If the people coming from outside, they will just bring the irony, the pity, and they will be coming as a liability to the country. Because the basic fundamental principle says that the country must take care of its own people at the first instance. Then only, first help yourself, then help others. This is the basic principle. This is on this manner actually how life works. And if any religious community is not saying good, or it is not finding a good feasible environment in their respective countries where they are existing now, it is the internal matter of that state. Because when any legal partition, when any government notified partition, let's say in 1947, or the exchange of conclaves with Bangladesh happened, it was governmental backed. And there only people were actually given opportunities to make changes. And if they want to shift to India, one general law must not bring them in. However, the 5 principles where we have the mechanism of granting citizenship, that must be followed. In this manner, a balance is actually made in the country where people are not being called in mass volumes, and they are not about to destroy and disturb the already existing structure in the country by giving more pressure and more burden and becoming an asset of disadvantage or a liability to the already suffering system of the country. Here, when India's literacy level improves, when India's social parameters and social vitals are improved, for example, child sex ratio is improved, CMR, IMR, MMR, all these issues are improved, and everyone is living in their own house, be it even one room structure, doesn't matter. If all the people are getting the clean water, the safe environment, the sanitation facilities, and whatsoever, and they have the assured income, be it 500 rupees a day, doesn't matter. If their survivability is not a question of existence or question of challenge on their survivability, it is fine to give and call people, because we are already done with our problems. But if these are existing, it is not a rational step to add on the already at the verge of population explosion in the country, and the demographic dividend is lacking the skills required, is lacking the monetary supply required, because Indian budgetary aspects is already deficit in nature. Our balance of payment is not so good. Our capital account deficit, our current account deficit, are all the account deficit, revenue account deficit, all the deficits actually making the entire issue vulnerable. Especially in this time of COVID, it is the international image, protocols, and consensus, and India's humanity, that India is helping people wherever they are in their respective country. For example, even after the regime of Taliban in Afghanistan, India sent millions of doses there, food there, absolutely free of cost. This is India's humanity, because we believe in Vasudev Kutumbakam, that whole world is a family. That is appreciated by world ever and ever, and has been appreciating in India, and India will be appreciated with such kind of philosophy where India is actually working on. But calling them in by giving it any sort of explanation, we don't argue that government decisions are bad. We just argue about the current situation, that is this the right time to implement that decision or not. This is just a matter of debate, because tomorrow when you are going to be civil servant, you cannot raise questions on the government, because legislature or the parliament has this duty, and it is their prerogative to make laws, and civil servants are not allowed to question that, and morally they should not, because their work is to implement the policies have been passed in the form of bills discussed, and they're becoming act and laws. It is their responsibility to do that. But as citizenry, and as making a perspective of an informed perspective, we can actually see what the problems are around us, and how can we contribute towards that by putting our intellectual discussions, debates, analysis, and asking our government and making choices during the time of elections. This is what we say about this area. And anyways, we presume that standing committees or parliament actually, or the government will bring out such a way that it will make sure that humanity is never disturbed anywhere in the country or in the neighborhood areas. And also, if their arrival is being planned in the form of law, then how government is going to take care of them, that is also need to be thought about in a good manner. So this is about the Citizenship Amendment Bill, and little bit about NRC I tried to discuss in this topic, to just give you a general synopsis that what are the things and how things are going on. Next is this Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE. This is important because Russia-Ukraine issue is there. Russia ruled out any concession talks with the United States on soaring tensions over Ukraine. We have elaborately covered Ukraine and Russia in our previous videos. You can check it there. Because Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin talked for 50 minutes, more than 50 minutes on international hotline while discussing Ukraine, but that conversation did not go well. Facing strong pressure to pull back troops, because 1 lakh army personnel are on the Donbass region or at other regions of Ukraine border with Russia. So here, what is this organization? The high-level discussion kick off a week of diplomacy in which Russia will meet with NATO and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. What is this organization? With 57 participating states in North America, including the United States, Europe and Central Asia, including Russia, but not India, the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, is the world's largest regional security-oriented intergovernmental organization. World's largest regional security-oriented organization for security and cooperation in Europe. So this is regional. And when European Union has 27 members or many members in entire Europe other than European Union, so they all, or the other members of North America, Central Asia and Russia, they are making it as a region or regional organization to discuss the security and cooperation, so that any kind of confusion is generally ruled out. So it is the world's largest regional security-oriented intergovernmental organization. Its mandate include issues have an impact on common security, such as arms control and the promotion of human rights, freedom of the press and fair elections, terrorism, good governance, energy security and human trafficking, democratization and national minorities. Here, the issues of human rights, arms control, good governance, human trafficking, national minorities, with all these issues are actually pointing towards Russia and Ukraine. Because in the eyes of Europe, European Union, European nations, former Soviet bloc members and United States, is that Russia is trying to implement or impose its hegemony over Ukraine. after 2014, when Crimea was annexed by Russia, uh, the Western region countries are thinking that, or in general idea of that, Russia is anytime about to take control of entire Ukraine, and in this manner other previous Soviet members, because Russia's position is now much better than it was at the time of Russian disintegration or Soviet bloc disintegration. So this is basically a fear, a paranoid situation in the eyes of NATO members, right? So here the OSCE works for stability, peace and democracy through political dialogue. The organization using a comprehensive approach to security that encompasses the political, military, economic and environmental and human dimensions. Through this approach and with its inclusive membership, the OSCE helps bridge differences and build trust between states by cooperating on conflict prevention, crisis management and post-conflict rehabilitation. The issue is, see, the Kremlin is insisting NATO must never grant membership to ex-Soviet Ukraine, which is pushing to join. If it is joining NATO, since it was ex-Soviet Union member, the Russia will take its joining as a negative imposition and negative steps by NATO, and therefore will disturb Russian approach towards it. And since United States has a great say in NATO and it is against Russia, so the world is under fear that Cold War situation might back in. And this time, if it is not, the Cold War could not be Cold War, then if it is not Cold War, it could be something else, which could be disastrous for the country, because both are Security Council members holding veto powers, also both are nuclear states, and both are exempted from the non-proliferation treaty and other those safeguards. So in this manner, the USA warned of severe consequences if Russia invades Ukraine, and if Russia do not call their military personnel back or away from the Ukrainian border. And Russia would never accept such hegemonies or such directions coming from United States, its traditional rival based on Cold War, I'm saying. To hear and to abide by such directions will actually be taken as a kind of ego on Russia. And hence Russia is a self-capable country, would definitely try to show the aggression in the same amount what USA is actually showing to them, because Russia is comparatively in a stronger position when we compare its existing position back to the 1992 during the time of Russian disintegration. And Russia has already said that Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 must not be forgotten by United States of America, because that was about to lead to the nuclear war. Right after United States dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. So Russia and United States, or Soviet Union actually, they went into that level of conflict. And today when even United States is warning Russia to not to invade Ukraine, especially after Crimean annexation, that Russia is reminding United States of the same situation, which is not at all a healthy scenario for the world peace at the moment. Because nuclear disaster, when world is already suffering from this virus disaster, if this is transforming or adding with another disaster, the world will be nowhere and humanity will be in great trouble. So we hope that this OSCE is actually able to resolve the situation between Russia and United States for that matter. Some points from PT perspective about this AIIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, because there have been questions about this. What is the news actually? The governor Urjit Patel has been appointed vice president of the Beijing-based Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Friends, in 2016, or might be 15, UPSC asked the headquarter of AIIB, and the options were given Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and another. So it was asked that where the headquarter of this bank was. The AIIB, launched in Beijing in 2015, has approved more loans for India than any other member of the bank. Important. And these AIIB, National Development Bank, this Asian Development Bank, or ASEAN Bank, whatever, they are actually in existence in the opposition of Western dominated institutions like World Bank, like IMF, and IRDB, IRBD, whatsoever the members of this World Bank groups are. They believe that since the major contributors are coming from West, so they are showing their dominance in the mechanism of distribution or dividing the shares with the world, and the funding is actually based on political agendas and to change the equation of geopolitical nature of the world. In this manner, the eastern region, backed by China, Japan, Korea, and the ASEAN countries, India, so they have come up with their own versions which are actually working in direct opposition or in the parallel monetary supplying system of Western regulated banks, especially World Bank, IMF. So this is the reason of existence of such banks. China is its biggest shareholder and India is the second largest of what? AIIB. The US and Japan are not among its 104 members. In recent years, the bank had transitioned away from mostly co-financing projects with World Bank or Asian Development Bank in recent years. But initially, when it was launched, the situation was not like that. Initially, 70 to 80% of the projects were co-financed, but now that share of project is standalone. In October, India applied for loans from the AIIB and ADB to procure 667 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines, with the ADB expected to lend $1.5 billion and the AIB around $500 million under the ADB's Asia Pacific Vaccine Access Facility, APVAX. So it is basically that the regional problems, the continental problems will be held or will be taken care in the region itself. Because the region, when it is centralizing, or the region when it is actually dislocating or like taking themselves away from the Western blocks, because UNSC has a problem, because United Nations General Structure has problem. So in this manner, all these financial institutions are working, and therefore the regions who are members of these groups, they are only asked to take loans from there, and more lenient terms and conditions are given. The repaying back period is also higher, because no one wants to leave the loops in the regional integration that any other country is coming in. And the biggest beneficiary of this entire mechanism of monetary supply system is China. That is why China is the largest shareholder of AIIB. Some points about Mekidattu multi-purpose project. Important. It is in Karnataka. Here the river is important, on which river it is. So what is the news? Amid threat of COVID-19 spread and warning by the Karnataka government against violation of weekend curfew rules, the Congress began its 11-day Padayatra seeking early implementation of the Mekidattu drinking water project. So what is it? Mekidattu is located at the confluence of Kaveri and Arkavathi rivers in Karnataka. Rivers are important for prelims. It is in Karnataka and on the confluence mean where two rivers are meeting. This is confluence. The project is disputed between Karnataka and Tamil Nadu over the sharing of Kaveri waters. This project, I'm not talking about Kaveri project disputes, because Kaveri river disputes, because here the parties are also Puducherry and Kerala. It is India's most disputed river. Karnataka intends to build a balancing reservoir or mini KRS, that is Krishna Raja Sagar Reservoir near Mysuru across river Kaveri near Mekedatu for supplying potable water, that is drinking water. Potable means drinking water or clean water, to Bangalore and parts of Mysuru region in the near future. Since it is for potable purpose, the government need not take approval from the Ministry of Environment and Forest for this project, because it is only required when the hydroelectric power projects or other dams are built for. However, Tamil Nadu is objecting that the project would affect the flow of Kaveri water into Tamil Nadu. The project has also come under controversy as environmentalists fear irreversible damage to the ecosystem at the Kaveri Wildlife Sanctuary due to large-scale submergence. Now, this is a general topic. In the previous video of last day, that is, on the date of 7th of January, we have discussed this water mapping system through 3D mapping technology in India. I discussed that if there would be any major trouble to humanity, that will be because of water. Interstate water disputes are of such a high nature that almost 50% or more than 50% states are in a kind of water dispute with one state or the another. This dispute is because the availability of fresh water is very limited in the country, and how we have to prevent the misuse of this fresh water, and how to explore the more arena or alternatives to the fresh water availability, and how can we reuse and reutilize it. That also makes sense. So here you can see that Mekedatu, when government of Karnataka is trying to make the potable purpose water project, the another state is actually arguing over it. Those arguments could be politically motivated whatsoever, but the ultimate question is we need clean water, we need fresh water, because without water, life is absolutely zero on planet Earth. So how this entire situation is being tackled, how the thing is going on, you just keep a record of it and make a perspective, and also keep some solutions ready that how can we prevent the misuse of water, because prevention of misuse is absolutely important, because water cycle can only be ensured when environment is in healthy condition and it is working finely. So this is about the water issue or this thing. Then Chala Reserve Forest. Chala Reserve Forest. Where is it now? A creeper that once gave a monk's robe its saffron hue has made a Buddhist village in eastern Assam adopt a forest. 5 years ago, the bhikkhus of Buddhist monastery in the 152-year-old Chalapather Shamgaon had bemoaned the near extinction of Bhungloti, a creeper that in combination with the pith of the roots of a jackfruit tree yielded a saffron dye for their robes. So this saffron dye was actually made out of the roots of a jackfruit tree to dye the robes of the bhikkhus. The women of the village too lamented how getting vital ingredients from our 4 indigenous plants for dyeing their mekhela, a traditional garment, indigo blue, was getting increasingly difficult. So mekhela, this is important, that what is this mekhela? It is a traditional garment used by Buddhist bhikkhus. The Chala Reserve Forest is about 100 meters above sea level, but it houses a few orchids that are usually found in higher altitude. So this Chala Reserve Forest is in Assam. And here the thing is that the natural or indigenous plants are giving the saffron dye or indigo blue, which is actually used to dye the mekhala, which is a traditional garment used by the bhikkhus in the region. So Jallikattu and Kambala, the Supreme Court gave the nod to resume bullock cart races in Maharashtra that were prohibited since 2017. And Jallikattu and Mekhala both are bullock cart races. And Mekhala is taking place in Maharashtra and Karnataka, and Jallikattu is in Tamil Nadu. What is Jallikattu? It is a traditional bull taming sport organized in Tamil Nadu during Pongal. The sport involves a natively reared stud that is set free inside an arena filled with young participants. The challenge lies in taming the bull with bare hands. In 2011, the Environment Ministry added bulls to its 1991 notification banning the training and exhibition of bears, monkeys, tigers, panthers, and dogs. The notification was challenged the Supreme Court and was upheld in 2014. So now, after a long stay period, they have lifted the ban. The ministry in 2016 modified its earlier notification and declared that the sport could continue despite the existing ban. But many PETA like organization have actually challenged it and said that the animal rights are in danger. It is suffered because bull taming is ultimately killing the bull, and hence it is not at all accepted. In this context, Tamil Nadu and Maharashtra have amended the central law, the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act 1916, and allowed Jallikattu and bullock cart racing, respectively. The state laws have been challenged in the apex court. That is the situation. But the local people say that through these sports, they are able to reserve the bulls of high breed, high quality, because people are excited and motivated, and therefore they are putting more efforts in conserving the areas, the resourcing, and building the sustainable environment for their habitat and continuation, that they are raising their bulls. And especially when it is this bull taming or such sports, what they call like Jallikattu, they are actually becoming the part of their honor, pride, and their culture. And in the name of environment protection, or in the name of legal protection or animal rights, their culture cannot be hurted. This is what the people who are supporting the Jallikattu like sports events, or coming from the 4 or 5 districts where Jallikattu is practiced in Tamil Nadu, they are saying it. And they have also scientifically tried to show that through exercising such sports on the religious occasions like Pongal, they are able to raise and save the breed of specially raised bulls for the special purposes of these sports, and in a way their economy is also sustaining. Hence, the saving and reserving of such breed is only possible when the sports events of like Jallikattu is taking place. This is what they are saying. So this is, I'm just telling you for the perspective. What is Kambala? Kambala is an annual buffalo race. It is mainly celebrated in Karnataka and Maharashtra. Maharashtra region, those are adjoining the borders of Karnataka, like nearby the Belgaum districts and other regions. In Kambala, the contest takes place between 2 pairs of buffaloes, each pair raised in wet rice fields, important, controlled by a whip lashing farmer. So Kambala is taking place in the wet rice field, and it is happen in pair. So majorly, these are the major bits I just wanted to cover in this video. Hope you understand and like the video. Thank you so much.